there, Kim. Good to see you.
I can never figure out Zoom. Good to see you.
I haven't seen, for some reason, I've not seen you for a bit, so
Yeah.
good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yeah, we weren't invited to the big White House shindig.
Uh,
But anyway, how's the East Coast?
the East Coast is mostly the same. Frankly, the weather's awesome out here now.
Oh, nice.
So come on out and take a visit.
Yeah, I'll be out
This is,
in New York in June.
oh, New York in June's not bad. You don't really want to be here August.
Yeah,
That's not the best time
No.
in the mid-states, especially DC, which is a swamp. We just try to hide it.
Yeah. New York City gets that way too, I think, if I remember correctly. All right, let me share the notes.
Excellent.
And it takes over my entire screen. I converted our notes doc to pageless mode too, so it looks different. That is why.
Converted? Did that require much? I thought that was just a setting.
Yeah, no, it is a setting.
Okay.
Yeah, but it makes it look a little nicer. We've noticed too, they've got some cool new table features in these templates. If you ever want to get fancy. Anyway, I don't work for Google anymore. Just pointing that out.
Just believe I worked for Google. I had no idea that there were those new features. So
see.
I thought a company of 140,000 people was a hive mind. That you were all plugged in like the Borg. I get that from questions about Shopify, like what's wrong with shops? And it's just like, I don't work on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's kind of like my parents that ask me for tech support and don't realize that.
You're an architect. You can help my my roof leak, right?
All right. Cool. We got a couple of things on late breaking conflict. Josh, did you add the first item? Are you not here at all? Or are you coming later? Because we can move that.
So the first item was the Abhishek. I think Joshua put it in to represent his point of view because he can't make it.
Hey, you broke up a little there, Isaac.
Oh, I think Joshua added that sub bullet to represent his point of view because he can't be here today. Got
it. Abhishek, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
What's up? Yeah, do you want to talk about the first one? Oh, welcome everyone. Does anyone want to say hi really quick if you're new? Sorry, just got right into business.
This is the second time I've come to this meeting, but my co-founder, Bunny, is going to join as well. Our company, Shebash, works with DoD Platform One.
Awesome. Welcome. What was your name?
I didn't catch that.
Our company, Shebash, works with DoD Platform One.
What's your name?
My name's Cameron Banowski.
Oh. Nice to meet you.
Cameron, last name spell?
I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Awesome. Even better.
Well, welcome.
So welcome. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hey, what's up? My name's Bunny Hernandez. I'm here with Cameron as well from Shebash. We work with DoD Platform One.
Awesome. Welcome.
Sorry, I know this is a little off topic, but is Platform One the one that came out of Kessel Run, or is that a different thing?
I don't know. Like there's arguments I think to be made. So I would say that all efforts in the Air Force that you see like software factory come out of Kessel Run in some fashion. However, like directly, no.
Okay. I was just curious because I used to work for Pivotal, so we heard a lot about Kessel Run.
Oh man, I feel so, yeah. I'm sorry.
Interesting, because I would have said yes. So there you go. No objective truth on this one yet.
We'll follow up next meeting. All right, cool. Abhishek, do you wanna talk about the steering committee?
Yes, one thing is for sure, which is we are hitting a 1-year anniversary for SLSA. So this is a great time to think about the steering committee itself. Right now it's 7 members. We could potentially expand it, or do we even need one at all? So I just wanted to start a discussion, and Isaac had some ideas too. Isaac, you want to share some ideas?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, and Kim, this came up a little bit yesterday in the supply chain working group. I feel like we've got potentially a missing forum or venue or group where, you know, we have the salsa community, which is great as a place for folks to get introduced to salsa, to come and join the community, understand what it's about, to share progress and have, you know, broad, you know, wide discussion. And then we have the supply chain working group, which is, you know, broader than salsa and you know, seeking on charter clarification itself. I think one of the things that I picked up on is I think we're potentially missing a forum or venue where we can have concerted, you know, directed effort towards, you know, actually pushing things forward in a more convergent fashion, if this is a kind of a more divergent and broad meeting. And so I think, you know, just sharing again, like kind of as someone who's relatively new to this, but one of my observations is that it would be great to have maybe a smaller set of, you know, highly engaged participatory folks who could be, you know, relied upon to take the, you know, all the great input we gather from the community at large here and distill that down into action, essentially, and then you know, execute on that action. So I think, I mean, I don't know if others agree or have seen the same, but I just wanted to share that as an observation as someone who's been here just a few months.
That doesn't sound like a, oh, I'm sorry, I'll raise my hand.
Oh, sure. Sorry. So quickly, yeah, no, I definitely sort of agree with the idea of, hey, these are sort of very large community meetings. There needs to also be sort of, hey, some work streams where with hands-on keyboard actually sort of be doing some of the specific work, especially since when this meeting started, and it was originally like a dozen, and then now it's I have to keep scrolling to see how many people are on. So obviously this has grown larger, whereas originally it did start off on a oh, okay. yeah. But I also think that there's also a few other sorts of projects that fall under OpenSSF that I think are doing some of that as well. Because I know that some groups are using Salsa to actually generate stuff, whether it's the Salsa examples or stuff like there's the other tool like Fresca, which is using Tecton and whatnot to sort of salsify stuff, and there's a few other things as well.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Aaron, do you want to go next? Aaron, with your hand raised?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is messing up. I was just gonna quickly comment based on what Isaac just mentioned, looking at, you know, I'm helping out, making some comments on that roadmap that Mark had proposed, which I think is really helpful for us as a community for driving, right, some of the work together. On that actual roadmap, there's some folks that are tagged, right, for kind of being the leads for those milestones. So I think that could be a good way we organize, right, and get some of that work done and have some of those work streams outside of these kinds of community meetings. So just a quick comment.
Cool. David?
Yeah, I mean, I am all for, you know, hey, getting work done. Yeah, +1 for that. You know, frankly, I think what we want is not so much essential as many people working on many pieces, hopefully coordinating with each other. I don't know if we really need a new group, just more of an encouraging people to go on the various piece parts. And I think that, again, I do think that roadmap gives us some help figuring out the things left to do.
Cool. Arnaud?
Yes, hi. I mean, I would warn against the idea of excluding people from participating. I mean, all you need to do really is to allow for those who are contributing actively to be recognized as such. And, you know, if we actually, I mean, for the spec itself, also, if you make it a spec, right, then we should use the community specification framework, which recognizes different roles. There is like editors and contributors, so maintainers. And just like for open source, there are some rules that you use to, you know, elect people or select people who will become maintainers and have right access. And there's a kind of natural selection that can happen through this. And I mean, right now we have, it might be valuable to have two different series of calls, one for people who are really contributing to the spec itself, and those who are more like, hey, I'm just trying to use it and I want to better understand how, or expose their problems, their use cases. But I don't think otherwise we want to do this kind of like, oh, we're going to create a small club and kind of exclude, because this is actually very hard to implement and it can be seen very negatively by the community at large. I do want to point out one more thing is in the discussion within the TAC about the governance structure, as you know, so far we haven't anticipated for this kind of steering committee, and doesn't mean there cannot be one. There were actually from the CNCF, we actually borrowed some of the governance structure initially to get started. There was this notion that working groups would have a steering committee, and the feeling by the TAC was mostly, well, we don't really know that we need this at this point. It's probably not, you know, the organization is not big enough to justify having that. So it's not excluded that this could be used. And if here you guys feel like this really fills a specific function that we need to have, it can definitely be added to the governance structure, which is still very much, you know, in development as we speak. But I'm actually interested to hear what the role of the steering committee specifically is. In my investigation, this is the only case where I've found there's a group that has a steering committee. I don't know of any others. Maybe there are some, because I'm still trying to figure out what's going on in OpenSSF, because the challenge is not always very well documented or easy to find out. But so I'm all ears as to what you think this steering committee is ought to be doing. Thank you.
Yeah, we created the steering committee at like the very first SLSA meeting. So it's been in existence since we created the project. I think it was like the second meeting or something. So we can go back down through the notes and dig that info up. But there is the community specification that's being proposed. And I think where the status of that right now is we're waiting to figure out how to kind of merge in the existing steering committee. But I think Abhishek's point here was re-looking at that and maybe doing a refresh on the votes. But Mark?
Yeah, I saw, so just to add this, I did see some of the background info, so thank you for that. But I mean, on the community specification, we don't really have a choice. This is governed by the charter of OpenSSF, which says if you do spec work, you must use the community specification. So somehow we need to adapt to this.
Yeah, that's what I said. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Arno. I think your points are spot on. Just to be clear, the intention is not to exclude, like the intention is actually the opposite, is to make it easier for people to contribute. Like that's our goal. I think there's like one is like we want people to contribute and have like work on different problems, breaking up the problem into multiple pieces, as some folks mentioned, and that they could go off and work on that. I think is a great way to do that. So people who are interested in specific people can get in specific pieces can get together. So as a disclaimer, this is my first experience working in any serious capacity in open source. So I don't know how other organizations do this. I think we need the purpose of the steering committee, as I understand it, is in order for it to have like a hierarchy to resolve disputes. So if there's some sort of disagreement, then how do you resolve that? I don't know if we need a steering committee within SLSA or if we have a way that we go up through OpenSSF to do that. I don't know what the right path is, but in my mind, that's like the one thing that I want, which is that like we have a way to resolve it. And also, I think you mentioned this, and I think we need to do this pretty urgently, is define what the different roles are and have the different like maintainer, contributor, whatever, admin, I don't know what the proper roles are, to make decisions.
Shah?
I wanted to sort of follow on originally from Anod and I guess from Mark as well, in the steering, I beg your pardon, in the securing software repositories group, we have a steering committee as part of the charter. So we took the charter that's been controversial more or less at wholesale and listed out an initial steering committee based on activity over the previous 5 or so meetings before we presented to TAC. But that was mostly because at the time it was like, you need this to get past TAC approval. I don't think we felt any overriding need. But in terms of what Mark's saying, that's how I see it too. I see the steering committee as a backstop. If consensus can't be formed, there's a mechanism to settle the dispute. And if consensus, even if that's contentious, it can still be bounced up to TAC as a final arbiter. So I see it more as a formality than I see it as more of a formality than a group that is active, but I guess that's really up to how SLSA folks decide to work the system, whether they want that to be quiescent until there's a dispute, or whether they want that to be a thing that's live and active and running concurrently with this call. Oh, yes, I know.
So yeah, so I mean, you're saying a formality that seems to imply that this is a lightweight thing that doesn't matter so much. But if you make it the decision making point on any kind of controversial issue, this is by no means a formality. I think there's a way out of this, which is essentially, if you look at and I understand you guys are not necessarily familiar with the community specification framework, but it defines this notion of role, the different roles. And essentially, I think the steering committee, or what you want the steering committee to do, is accomplish through the roles that exist in the community specification framework with the maintainers. And so, and it's, I mean, if you guys are familiar more with open source, it's typical in open source as well. And, you send pull requests, and at the end of the day, the maintainers are free they are in control of what gets merged. So it's the same here. You don't necessarily need to call it a steering committee, or you might just call the collection of maintainers your steering committee, and I think you would achieve the same result.
I mean, sorry, I'll jump in ahead of you, Michael, to answer that. Yes, and the language that we use that was templated by the OpenSSF actually says that the steering committee is composed of maintainers with a capital M. So I guess I agree. I have a sort of an asterisk here, which is my background amongst several is in student politics. I'm sorry, everyone. First of all, at least in student politics, they tend to do stuff by rules of order, and it tends to be every decision is voted on. That has the one advantage that you've exercised the muscle. I think part of what would be contentious in the case of contention will be the mechanism itself. People will be surprised by it arising from the ground unforeseen. The other thing, though, is going back to that student politics thing, I don't smell trouble. I've been the person who's had to draft constitutions to deal with fuckery and expected fuckery. And this doesn't seem like such a situation to me, at least. And as I said, I expect that anything that was sufficiently contentious would bounce up to TAC in any case as a final backstop. So sorry, Michael, I apologize for cutting you off.
So
Sure.
Michael and Isaac, and then move on. I don't think
Yeah.
this is helping security.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think at least I know in the few meetings, like the whole point of the steering committee was just to kind of go through and say, hey, here are folks who are essentially dedicating themselves. They are claiming to at least be, up to some standard of like they're attending the meetings regularly. They're and maybe we just call them maintainers or whatever. But the idea was that, hey, they are provided some deference, not because like they're for any other reason other than that, like, oh no, they contribute a bunch to here and they are maybe considered the subject matter experts in what they are doing. I just think that there's like that was the original reason for it. And so whatever it is, if we say, hey, no, maintainers kind of meet that thing, then that sounds good as well. I think the idea was also, you know, given that this is a specification, unlike, let's say, just sort of an application where, you know, we're adding features, the specification maybe needs a little bit more rigor around changes to the actual like text of the specification. That I'm just providing some context on why we, from my understanding at least, of why we originally had the steering committee in the first place.
Isaac?
I think you're right, Kim, that we've probably bottomed out here. I wanted to make one small clarification that I just added to the notes, because the notes were saying, you know, hey, we need a smaller group of people, and folks talk about, you know, an exclusionary approach, and that really wasn't. I think I must have misspoken there. I think, you know, what I'm more pointing at is that we don't have a venue, and collaboration structure to actually drive work streams, right? We have a great forum here for broad discussion, for surfacing issues, for gathering broad community input. In terms of, you know, how do we track the actual work streams which are convergent, which align, which drive towards particular outcomes that we care about? There's a venue and collaboration structure. It's less about a group of people, I think, and more about how do we, you know, overall track the, you know, the progress of the, you know, of these various work streams, which we collectively think are important. And that's the missing piece for me. And it's certainly less about, you know, much less about let's have a smaller group of people who are in charge of stuff, and more about like, do we have the right venue and collaboration structure for driving work streams forward? And with that, I'm giving back to you.
Sorry.
Thanks. Cameron, do you want to say something quick? And then we can
Yeah, super quick. Like I don't know like across OpenSSF how other projects are handling you know, the contribution of works, like if it's standardized or not. I mean, I think that what's clear is that there's a gap that needs to be filled, identified, and like actually done, like executed on. I guess like practical like outcome, couldn't that start as a GitHub project today and just see what happens?
Cool. All right, Arnon, I'm gonna move on to the next topic.
I know.
The next action items are for us to figure out the community spec. I don't know if Steve Wenzel from the SF can help us with that. And I think for collaboration, we should just get some doodle polls going on some focus topics. All right, Mark, you're up.
Yeah, I don't know if folks have seen this example of a supply chain compromise that happened. I think it was like last weekend. The Python CTX library is some 8-year-old Python package that was registered to a domain name that was about to expire. And so someone hijacked the domain name when it expired. Well, seemingly, apparently, used password reset to hijack the account and then uploaded malicious versions of the package. They notably did not touch anything on GitHub. They only uploaded versions of the package that contained additional malicious code that scraped credentials. I think this type of thing happens a lot. I think it would be valuable to maybe have a blog post about this, to talk about like, here's how SLSA could help in this particular case, just to kind of let people get agreement and let people know kind of what we're thinking and how we envision SLSA working in the future. Anyway, I want to raise this up. Just FYI, that's all.
I had a quick question. If it's possible to get a potted summary, how do you see SLSA helping? You're muted.
So in my mind, I see SLSA helping here because at upload time, there would be some sort of, how we get here is a question. Here's the vision for the future. At upload time, prior versions of this package had provenance saying it was built in some verifiable, reliable way, salsa whatever way, from the official GitHub repo. And there's a policy enabled that prevents future uploads if they are not built from that GitHub repo. And so this particular attack, if the attacker did not have GitHub write access, then they would not be able to. They would be able to upload different versions from that Git repo, build and upload different versions of our Git repo, but they would not be able to build from arbitrary commits. They wouldn't be able to insert the malicious code that were scraping environment variables and sending it to some app, if that makes sense. And to the comments, I think this particular attacker did modify a Git repo for a PHP package, but not for this particular Python package. I don't know if they had access to
They didn't modify the repository. They created the repository under a different name for a different GitHub username. And then so if you hijack somebody's name and then you try to create a repository that previously existed, GitHub says, no, you can't do that. But you can create a repository before with a different name. And then when you change your root GitHub username, you're able to hijack the name of the repository that existed previously.
Say that again, Jonathan.
So the way that the person that performed the attack posted a blog post on Medium stating how they did this. And
URL would be appreciated, but carry on.
Yeah, I will do that shortly. But the way that it worked for the PHP case was that if you delete your GitHub account, right, someone else can take your GitHub username. Right. But it doesn't let you post a repository with a name that the previous user had for their username.
Okay.
Right. So what they did was they created another account with a different name and then created the repository with the name that was going to collide. And then they changed their root username to be that person they were taking over the account of. GitHub doesn't validate that new repositories moving over from names don't conflict with existing things that were present previously.
Got it.
Yeah.
And GitHub's not the only game in town. So even if GitHub fixed it, that same problem might happen with GitLab or SourceHut or anybody else.
Right. And so for the Python case, what happened was the user. So when you look at a GitHub account, or when you look at a PyPy repository, it says who's the author, and it also lists their email address. And so he scraped all of a bunch of projects off of PyPy and looked at the email addresses and saw that the domain of the maintainer's email address had expired, and bought the domain, and then was able to initiate password reset to the new email address that he now owned, and got the reset URL, and then was able to take over the package.
Yeah, so if I can jump in here, I mean, it's a legitimate concern, and as people die and stuff, that's going to be totally a thing that we're gonna have to deal with in the future. And like with any attack, we first have to ask, well, what are what countermeasures make sense, and then does any of those make sense for SLSA? I mean, certainly you could at least detect if a package has switched its repo. That's not always a bad thing, but it is an indicator of concern. In this case, though, really it's a takeover of a mail address, and the signal's pretty temporary. You really have to do a constant watch to notice this MX address. Suddenly this MX stopped existing and then it started again. Simply noting where it was before isn't enough. And people do change their MX addresses, so just even noting a change isn't enough. You really have to note the domain expired. That does seem like it's something like more like the repos would do than an individual project could do. But certainly would be. So I think we really need to work out what are plausible countermeasures, and then which ones make sense for a project versus which one somebody else. I'm done.
So I think so. There's two things I wanted to just bring up. So one is I think obviously it'd be very valuable to know where Salsa might be able to help out, whether it's something like, hey, if I see that there is no longer if the signature is now different, right, of from a Salsa perspective of when I pull down that package, right, because now it's been, or something upstream, right, that maybe you'd be able to sort of catch that sort of thing. But the other thing would also be equally useful is to know where does Salsa not help out here, right? Where is something that either we have said, hey, it's a gap in Salsa, or it's something that, no, that particular thing is potentially out of scope for Salsa. We expect that to be sort of handled through some other cybersecurity kind of thing. I think that would also be useful.
Mark?
Sorry, I had Wi-Fi trouble, so I didn't hear anything Mike said. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say I think it's probably valuable to think of Salsa as a defense in depth. That like it's not like you have a single countermeasure and that's everything. But we could think of Salsa in this case as it is not sufficient to have write access to the package repository. You also need to have like, we don't just blindly trust anything someone with the credentials for the package repository. They also have to prove some other reason why the package is okay. Anyway, I think we could probably move on to the next topic.
I was just curious too. Jock just gave a thumbs up, but if this is being discussed in the package manager.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes, this attack is a subject of active discussion.
Oh, cool.
There's going to be a closed meeting because the countermeasures are relatively sensitive and different repos don't want to tip their hand as to what capabilities they do or don't have currently. But it is something that's under discussion.
Jock, could I get a invite to that by chance? Or I mean, if it's not possible, it's fine, but I would appreciate an invite if I could be there.
I will dig out, there's a doodle link to work out the time. I don't know if they've already picked a time though, so
My schedule is flexible, so I'm good. If it's a time, yeah.
I'll send you a link to the conversation about it, and there's a link in there.
Thanks.
All right, cool. Isaac, mapping Salsa to SSDF.
Yeah, just a super quick update here. I hope that I'd have something substantive and concrete to share, but I'm running a day or two behind on that. I shared with this community a few weeks back a document outlining some thoughts on how ALSA and SSDF are complementary, how they align, and not to sound too much like a product manager, but a synergistic. I again just encourage folks to drop comments in that doc. Michael, I appreciate yours already. Really good call on the language agnosticism of Salsa. I did think it would be worthwhile turning these thoughts into a blog post. So I've been working on that. And yeah, in the next day or so, I hope to create a PR for that. I'll ping in the Salsa Slack channel to give folks a heads up about that. You can take a look. But the update here is I've just been reworking the document for a broader audience and diving into some more specifics of point-wise alignment of Salsa and the SSDF framework. So I'll share that in the next day or two.
Awesome. Mike?
Yep. Just two things there. Yeah. Isaac, definitely interested in helping out more as much as I can. I know in the past, I've looked a little bit at, SSDF and mapping it to Fresca as well, which is one of the tools that we're building that is kind of doing a lot of the stuff with the Salsa perspective. And then the other thing that looking at was also doing this mapping via something like OzCal, which allows it to sort of stay as like structured data and whatnot. So you can kind of then say, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with it, but the basic idea is like, hey, it's as opposed to just sort of having spreadsheets of the mapping, you have structured data of the mapping that makes it very easy to then say, hey, if you hit this requirement, you're also hitting Salsa, which hits this other thing or whatever. And then so eventually you can
supporting automated reasoning about the frameworks essentially.
Yeah, with the potentially the long-term end goal being like, it would be great to maybe even have hooks in the code that say, hey, I am tagged as proof that I'm hitting this control. So then as opposed to doing what, a lot of places, whether you're the government or in the banking industry, which is I took a screenshot of the thing running. That's the control. You can go back and just say, no, here's the running code, and I can prove to you via monitoring and whatever that this is actually still, hitting that thing. That's kind of the end goal, but that's going to take us a while to get there.
That's a great point, though. I'll take a look at those, Cal. I'm totally new to me. I appreciate it. Thanks, Michael.
I can't see your name. Your hand's up. E.
Hi. Sorry, I don't know why it's not showing up. I'm Emmy. I work at Red Hat. Isaac, I had the flu a couple weeks ago, so I missed your announcement about this. And we've done a mapping internally, and I'd be happy to share that with you to see if it can help aid what you are working on or support it in any way.
Oh, that would be great, Amy. Thank you. Are you in the Slack? Yeah. If so, I'll tag you and I'll reshare the document, and maybe you could take a look and we can join forces.
I think so. I'm in a couple different OpenSSF Slacks, so
I will reach you one way or another. I appreciate it, Emmy. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, not a problem.
Isaac, I think you could use this as an opportunity to kick off a working group meeting just on SSDF and Salsa. If you want to lead it, you pick the time and we'll show up.
See, my grand plan is coming together. Yes, that's a good idea, Kim. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, and I'd be really excited to join in on that as well. It directly relates to a lot of stuff we're doing internally.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other thoughts there? No. Cool. Just a quick plug. We talked about this in yesterday's supply chain integrity group. John Speed from ChainGuard on my team, my company is working on a salsa inspired survey and looking for if people want to collaborate or give some feedback. And the plan is to send it out mid-June or July. The data will be all open except for PII if there's email addresses collected. We're happy for this to be an OpenSSF effort or SLSA effort. It's not clear what that means to me. If we can just change wording on it or something, or cross-org effort, whatever's easiest. It doesn't. I don't know if we can get OpenSSF to what the process would be to get them to help us sort of market the survey, but I hope without too much effort they could throw a tweet out or something, but unknown on that. So if you want to help, yeah, John Speed Myers' email address is right here, and feel free to reach out to him directly if you'd like to provide feedback or collaborate. And that's it about that. And then Mike, you got the last thing. You want to salsify some K8s?
Yes. So this is an open thing right now. So there is a proposal open up in the CNCF to sort of help secure the supply chain of maybe some example CNCF projects. So like, how can we start to apply stuff that's coming out of the CNCF, like the supply chain security best practices, as well as the new secure software factory reference architecture? Like, how can we apply all that to CNCF? And one of the big things from there was, well, like, hey, like one of the outcomes of the secure software factory is you should be able to get a really high SLSA level. And so how can we kind of all begin to maybe collaborate on a project like that? There's a proposal. Let me actually share the link here. Hold on here. I have it up. There we go. Other window. I'll post it in chat here. So this proposal originally wanted to maybe keep it a simple sort of project, but there did seem to be some big interest from the Kubernetes project because of how important Kubernetes is like, how can we start really doing some of this stuff? I know that Kubernetes is using SigStore in some ways, and they're starting to explore this, but they've expressed, at least at Valencia, I wasn't there, but there were apparently some discussions where they had expressed some interest in hey, maybe we can really start doing a big put in the supply chain stuff there. And just, I'm not going to talk too much about these graphs, but just to kind of show you, if I could just share the screen here for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
But just to kind of give you an example here is I did generate sort of a supply chain graph, which once again, it broke my graph viz, so I can't actually zoom in much further and actually make it readable. But like Kubernetes is up there, and here are all the sorts of things that Kubernetes relies on. Oh, yeah. So Isaac, I will definitely reach out to you about that. This, in particular, this one took overnight to render. And so I would love any sort of help on whether this tool or other tools to help visualize. And once again, the purpose here is not to even necessarily make this graph readable. It is to just show how much is actually involved here, right? And I am including both runtime and whatever. And actually, this graph was based on me through using Nix, but recursively generating salsa attestations for everything that recursively building and generating salsa attestations for everything that Kubernetes uses. So up there is Kubernetes, and then I generate, I sort of, recompiled Go and generated a salsa attestation for that. And I uploaded these all together, about 1,300 attestations into Recore. And then I wrote a Go tool to then go back the other way and say, hey, look at those salsa attestations, right? And go and say, here's the subject, and then go into the materials, which is, or you could also do the SBOM or whatever, but go into those materials and then look, are there salsa attestations for that? If there are, pull those down and help me build out this graph. Obviously, eventually we would love to be able to do stuff like putting in what keys you trust and whatever. So you could say, hey, I only trust up to this part of the supply chain. There might be additional stuff in there, but I don't necessarily trust what the data is saying. But just to be clear here, like this is kind of what it looks like. And there's probably nodes in here where there's going to be a lot of return on investment where we say, great, Kubernetes relies on this thing and it's in the critical path and we're not sure about the supply chain security of that thing. We might want to go in and focus on how we can kind of do some of that and whatever. But once again, I think the big thing, the big takeaway here from what we're trying to do at the CNCF is we would love to just sort of say, like, we want to make sure that Kubernetes doesn't end up on one of the things in the meetings that we talk about is like, oh, there's been another supply chain compromise. How do we, how do we classify it? We would love to make sure that as much as we can, Kubernetes doesn't end up on that list, as well as much as we can. No thing that Kubernetes relies on transitively also ends up on that list, because that would potentially mean that, through the transitive nature of it, Kubernetes still ends up on there. David?
Oh, look, I found the mute button. So Michael and I actually talked about this particular graph in the meeting just before this. And I'll observe that I've actually done this on even much smaller, like the OpenSSF best practices badge. There's actually a tool that automatically generates these graphs. And even for small projects, these graphs are insane. I've never found a way to use them other than to give the what Michael just did, which is, wow, this is complicated. So if somebody has a way of figuring out how to actually understand these graphs, that's awesome. Yes, believe it or not, even I'll have to drag up the one for best practices, because you can. Ruby actually has a built-in visualize, built-in. You can call a line and bundle viz, and it'll show you this stuff, but it's impossible to decipher. And so I've found the only thing really you can do is things like sorting out based on what seems to be the most important things to work on and work off it, instead of trying to follow these graphs.
Yeah. And so another thing just to sort of add on here, this is another part of that graph. And so this is another visualization that only took a couple of minutes to render. But just to kind of give an example here, this is, so the stuff that Kim showed is, I believe, just the dependencies from the perspective of what are the Go dependencies. This is both runtime, build time, and OS level dependencies. So like, as an example, where do most of these compilers actually like run in? Oh, well, there's some build script, and that build script runs in Bash, and that build script goes and says, okay, call this compiler or whatever. So Bash is a huge sort of thing here. There is inevitably things like, patches to files and one of the things over here is everything. I know you can't read it, but this is the mirror list of like, hey, where do I download the source? Well, I look up my mirror list, and so I rely on the mirror list. So if somebody were to compromise, in this case, the Nix, if somebody were to compromise the Nix mirror list, that would be real bad because it would start downloading from who knows where. I mean, they have other checks in there, just to be clear, but just to kind of provide an example there. But obviously a lot of things rely on curl, right? Because when I'm downloading the source, I obviously need to download curl.
Which build was this again? Is it something in Go?
Oh, this is literally Kubernetes.
Oh, yeah. So one thing to note with the Nix packages build of Kubernetes is there would actually be more on here. There's going to be a node somewhere that's just called Go modules, and they're just in one point. But if you look at deps.dev for Kubernetes, that has its own mega graph as well. So that's also not included in this.
Yep. I was actually going to mention that. Yeah. So the way that Google does, the way that Nix does it is it sort of does the vendoring thing, pulls everything in. And so this actually doesn't even include the Go-based dependencies. These are just actually the dependencies of Go itself, as well as some of the other things. This is not, so what Kim posted for the actual Kubernetes stuff is also would be in addition to this. David?
If we're going to do show and tell, if you give me just a second, I will show you what it looks like even for tiny projects. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, you'll need to stop sharing so I can share.
Yep.
There's a good graph that should come out from the GUIX project about going from stage 0 as well.
Okay, this is the same kind of graph, but for the OpenSSF Best Practices badge. It is a very small web application, intended to be a very small web application. We do our best to not add dependencies. Okay, and this is only the Ruby dependencies, not including, bringing in Nix, suddenly Michael's gonna have a much more complete. But even then, if I have to scroll back and forth, it gets complicated for even tiny ones. And if I bring this back so you can try to see the whole image, you really can't. And to bring this back to how does this affect SLSA? I mean, at least right now, visualizations of supply chains is notoriously difficult. And I don't know that we can easily do it for whole things. I mean, if you just say, hey, let's do one level, absolutely doable. But it's not easy as soon as you start doing big picture. And so if somebody has a better way to visualize, that's great. Otherwise, I think we need to find other approaches that don't depend on these kinds of visualizations because they're frankly not comprehensible.
Yeah. So one thing I would just add on there is one thing I've noticed is the graphs showing how complicated, for example, whether it's any of these graphs are, what they are useful at is showing people who are not familiar with the supply chain problem, who are not familiar with SLSA, like, what is the problem? Oh, yes. I just depend on these 5 packages. But you don't, right? Those right. 5 packages depend on each 5 packages. And before you know it, you actually somewhere along the lines depend on thousands of things. And that makes it significantly more complicated. And that's the problem, right? That's the real problem you're trying to solve. And so I think here is, if we can say, hey, we have SLSA attestations for all first layer dependencies, great. And then over time, we could get better and better and better. But I think this sort of thing just shows to people, because I know I've shown it to a few folks who know nothing about salsa, know nothing about supply chain. And I say, hey, what does your application depend on? They give me a list of packages, and I go and I say, okay, great. Actually, this is what you depend on. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, okay. And do you have signatures for all those packages? Do you have salsa attestations for all those packages? That's the thing that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Mike. It's terrifying. I'm going to have nightmares. All right. Any other last minute topics? Comments? Oh yeah, this is the dev. Go ahead, Jack. Did you, or Mike, is that screen share?
Yeah, this is cosine. So even when we're aware of the supply chain, things can get quite wild. It's very hard to read this graph.
I really enjoyed the chug while it's trying to redraw to center the.
Yeah, when you first press the graph button and it explodes outwards, it's entertaining.
Gives me a very sort of 1980s computer screen animation vibe to it.
Awesome. All right. I think that's a wrap. We've got a couple of AIs from earlier. Isaac, yeah, set up a little one-off if you want to deep dive into SSDF. Cool. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks all. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.